I played piano for the Mafia Don's kids. When his wife mocked my cheap song, he stood and said, "Apologize to my future wife." The wrought iron gates of the Moretti estate loomed, a filigreed promise of exclusion against the bruised morning sky. My taxi, an ordinary blot on the pristine landscape, felt small and insignificant as it crunched along the gravel drive. Each turn unveiled more manicured grandeur, hedges sculpted into impenetrable green fortresses, statues frozen mid-mythological drama, until the house itself bloomed into view. It was less a dwelling, more a monument, a sprawling edifice of dark stone and glinting glass, intimidating in its sheer, unapologetic scale. A shiver, unrelated to the crisp autumn air, traced a path down my spine. This wasn't just a job. It was stepping into another world, one where my well-worn practicality felt as out of place as a dandelion in a diamond mine. A stern-faced woman, her hair pulled back so tightly her eyebrows seemed perpetually surprised, met me at the immense oak doors. "Miss Vance," she stated, her voice as polished and cold as the marble floors beneath us. "I am Mrs. Thorne, the head housekeeper. Mr. Moretti awaits you." The foyer swallowed me whole. Light, filtered through stained glass panels depicting scenes of forgotten victories, cast fractured rainbows across a space so vast it felt like a public square. The air hung thick with the scent of aged leather and something subtly floral, an expensive perfume that hinted at a lingering absence. My sensible travel bag felt absurdly light in my hand, an anchor to a life that suddenly seemed infinitely far away. Every surface gleamed, every artifact whispered of generations of wealth and power. But there was an unsettling stillness, an oppressive quiet that spoke not of peace, but of profound loneliness. This house was a gilded cage, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. My core wound, that persistent fear of being overlooked, of being utterly unessential, twinged with a sharp, unwelcome ache. Mrs. Thorne led me through a labyrinth of hushed corridors, past rooms filled with antique furniture draped in dust sheets, each door a silent guardian of untold stories. My footsteps, even in my soft-soled shoes, seemed to echo too loudly. When we finally reached a room dominated by a grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the faint light from a tall window, two small figures were perched on a velvet settee, rigid as porcelain dolls. Leo, a boy no older than 6, sat with his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. His eyes, dark and heavy, flickered up at me for a fraction of a second, then retreated to the patterns on his scuffed sneakers. Beside him, Sophia, a tiny shadow of a girl with hair the color of polished mahogany, clutched a threadbare, one-eyed rabbit to her chest. Her face was a mask of careful neutrality, betraying nothing. My heart gave a little squeeze. They weren't sullen. They were simply absent, like ghosts in their own opulent home. "These are Mr. Moretti's children," Mrs. Thorne announced, her tone clinical. "Leo and Sophia. You will commence your duties immediately." She offered no further introduction, no softening of her voice. She simply turned and departed, leaving me stranded in a silence that felt vast and heavy. I knelt, trying to make myself less imposing. "Hi, Leo. Hi, Sophia," I said, my voice deliberately soft, a gentle ripple against the oppressive quiet. "I'm Alara. I'm going to be staying here for a while." Leo's head remained stubbornly bowed. Sophia's gaze stayed fixed on some unseen point across the room. My offering of warmth hung suspended, unreceived. This wasn't about tuition anymore, or even about a place to belong. This was about reaching two tiny broken hearts. I saw in their distant eyes a reflection of my own childhood longing, that aching need to be truly seen. My fear of being replaceable flared, then was immediately eclipsed by a fierce protective instinct. I wouldn't be replaceable here. I couldn't be. I rose slowly, my gaze falling on the piano. It was a magnificent Steinway, sleek and black, its keys beckoning like a whispered secret. Perhaps this was the key. "Do you two like music?" I asked, moving towards it, my fingers tracing the cool ivory. No answer. My grandmother used to say music was like a secret language, one we all understand, even if we don't know the words. I sat down, my hands hovering over the keys. For a moment, a wave of self-consciousness washed over me. This house, these children, this life, it was all so much bigger than me. But then I remembered the feel of the wood beneath my palms, the familiar weight of the pedals underfoot. This was my solace, my true voice. I started with a simple melody, something lilting and familiar, a forgotten lullaby from my own childhood. The notes unfurled, delicate at first, then gaining confidence, filling the cavernous space with a vibrant, living presence. It wasn't loud, not demanding, but it was insistent, a gentle current against the stultifying quiet. After a few measures, I glanced up. Leo's head had lifted fractionally. Sophia's gaze, though still not on me, had drifted towards the piano. The bunny, still clutched in her hand, had tilted almost imperceptibly. I transitioned into something more complex. A piece by Debussy. A swirling landscape of sound that evoked dappled sunlight through trees. It was a piece I often played when I needed to get lost. When the weight of my own precarious existence felt too heavy, I poured myself into it, my fear of being judged, of not being good enough, receding with each flowing chord. The music was a shield, but also a bridge. It was then I felt it. A shift in the air, a sudden weight of presence behind me. A tremor ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool autumn air or the minor key I was playing. My fingers stumbled for a fraction of a second, a jarring dissonance in the melody, before I regained control. I didn't look up, but every fiber of my being registered the man standing in the doorway, Dante Moretti, even from a distance, without seeing his face. His presence was a physical force, a gravitational pull. He was a pillar of stillness, yet he radiated an aura of controlled power, of a predator observing its domain. I finished the piece, my hands lingering on the keys, the last notes hanging in the air like spun glass. Then, slowly, I turned. He stood framed in the doorway, a silhouette against the lesser light of the hall, and for a fleeting instant, my breath caught in my throat. He wasn't merely tall. He possessed an imposing stature that seemed to bend the very space around him. His suit, impeccably tailored, hung on him like a second skin, a dark, dangerous uniform. His hair was midnight dark, swept back from a brow that seemed perpetually furrowed with a private burden. And his eyes? They were the color of storm clouds, deep and unyielding, fixed on me with an intensity that made the blood thrum beneath my skin. He said nothing, simply observed. His gaze was thorough, dissecting, and utterly without warmth. I remembered the hushed whispers I'd overheard in the city about him. The ruthlessness, the empire, the recent tragic loss of his wife. My mind immediately painted him as the stoic, grieving widower, cloaked in an untouchable sorrow. It was a comforting narrative, one that explained the coldness, the almost predatory stillness. "Miss Vance," he finally rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly current that vibrated through the floorboards and directly into my chest. It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement, a possessive claiming of my presence in his space. I stood, my knees feeling oddly rubbery. "Mr. Moretti," I managed, my voice a pale, reedy thing compared to his. I swallowed, trying to summon an air of professional composure I didn't possess. "The children and I was just playing." His eyes flickered to Leo and Sophia, then back to me. A curious light, fleeting and undefinable, ignited in their depths. It wasn't quite approval, but it wasn't disapproval either. It was scrutiny. "They rarely listen to music," he stated, his tone flat, devoid of inflection. But the words themselves, delivered with such directness, were a revelation. He was watching. He knew. I looked at the children. Leo was no longer looking at his shoes. His gaze was fixed on the piano. Sophia had actually shifted, turning her small body a fraction of an inch towards me, her one-eyed rabbit held a little less tightly. A tiny victory, but it felt monumental. "Music is a wonderful thing," I offered, a little more confidently. "It can fill the empty spaces." My gaze inadvertently lifted back to Dante. The words hung between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. Was he too adrift in an empty space? The thought was presumptuous, yet undeniably there. His jaw tightened, a muscle clenching beneath the taut skin. For a moment, his eyes, those deep, fathomless storm clouds, held mine. It was an unnerving connection, a silent interrogation that left me feeling exposed, as if he could see the wild, contradictory tangle of my thoughts. A sudden heat bloomed beneath my skin, a stark contrast to the chill that had previously permeated the opulent hall. Every instinct screamed danger, but my body hummed a traitorous counter-melody, a low, insistent hum that resonated with his presence. This man, with his formidable stillness and his air of profound sorrow, was an enigma I shouldn't want to unravel. Yet a strange, inexplicable magnetic pull tugged at something deep within me. It wasn't right. This intense awareness, this prickling sensation on my skin whenever his gaze rested on me. I dismissed it as awe, a natural reaction to such power and presence. But a dangerous, forbidden current began to stir, rippling just beneath the surface of my careful composure. Over the next few days, a tentative rhythm began to form. The children remained largely withdrawn, but the music worked its quiet magic. Each morning, after their lessons with the private tutor, I would coax them towards the piano. Sophia, ever the quieter, would eventually perch on the bench beside me, her small fingers sometimes reaching out to touch the keys, though never pressing them. Leo, more resistant, would hover in the doorway, his eyes darting between me and his sister, then back to the intricate patterns of the rug. I didn't push. I just played. Simple scales, children's songs, sometimes even just improvisational melodies that told stories without words. Slowly, imperceptibly, the house began to feel a little less like a tomb, a little more like a home, at least in the wing where we spent our days. Dante Moretti remained a distant, imposing figure. I'd catch glimpses of him in the vast corridors, a fleeting shadow disappearing into a study, or hear the low murmur of his voice from behind closed doors, always in hushed, serious conversation. He was a force to be reckoned with, a silent sentinel who ruled his domain with an iron fist. And yet there were moments. One afternoon, Sophia, emboldened by a particularly cheerful arpeggio, giggled. A tiny, fragile sound, like glass chimes in a soft breeze. I glanced up, my own smile broadening. And then I saw him. Dante, standing in the archway, utterly still, watching. The severe lines of his face, carved from granite, had softened around the edges, just a fraction. A fleeting warmth, like a solitary sunbeam on a winter's day, touched his eyes. He didn't smile, not truly, but the corners of his mouth eased, a silent testament to the small, joyous sound Sophia had made. Our gazes locked for a heartbeat, a profound, charged silence settling between us that felt more intimate than any spoken word. An unspoken connection, fragile as sponge sugar, formed and dissipated in an instant, leaving behind a lingering sense of something profound and dangerous. Another time, I was playing a Chopin nocturne, lost in the melancholy beauty of the piece, when I felt a familiar shift in the atmosphere. I kept playing, my fingers finding the familiar path across the keys, but my awareness sharpened. A faint scent of expensive cologne, dark and woody, registered in my senses. I didn't need to look. I knew he was there. He stayed, a silent audience for the entire piece. When the final lingering chord faded, I finally lifted my hands, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He was still there, his expression unreadable. Yet the intensity of his gaze was a tangible weight. "You play with feeling," he murmured, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, almost a confession. It wasn't a compliment, not really, more an observation. But coming from him, it felt like an intimate revelation. My cheeks flushed, a warmth spreading through me that defied explanation. I simply nodded, unable to articulate the tumultuous current of emotions his quiet acknowledgement had sparked. I found myself anticipating these stolen moments, this subtle exchange of presence and gaze. It was foolish, I knew. He was Dante Moretti, a man beyond my reach, beyond my understanding. I was the scholarship girl, the nanny, a transient in his grand, untouchable world. Yet, the longing persisted, a persistent hum beneath the surface of my careful professionalism. Each time our eyes met, a spark ignited, a whisper of forbidden possibility in the vast, silent house. I yearned to see that fleeting softness in his eyes again, that subtle shift in his otherwise impenetrable demeanor. It was a treacherous desire, one I tried to quell with reason, but my traitorous heart refused to obey. The days melted into a routine that began to feel less alien, more like the scaffolding of a nascent belonging. I discovered a small, rarely used garden, overgrown but beautiful, where Sophia sometimes allowed me to hold her hand. Leo, though still reserved, would sometimes share a fact he'd learned in his history lesson, his voice small but steady. I was weaving myself into the fabric of their lives, slowly, gently, exactly what I yearned for. The Moretti estate, once a cold monument, was beginning to feel less cold. It was a Tuesday evening, just as the last vestiges of twilight clung to the massive windows. The children were tucked into their beds, the house settling into its nightly quiet. I was descending the grand staircase, my mind already drifting to the new piece I wanted to try on the piano tomorrow, when a sudden, sharp explosion of sound shattered the evening's peace. The front doors, those formidable oak sentinels, burst open with a resounding thud. A woman stood framed in the entrance, a dazzling, dangerous apparition. She was tall, impossibly glamorous in a ruby-red dress that clung to every curve, her dark hair a sleek waterfall of silk. Diamonds glittered at her throat, catching the low light and scattering it in sharp, brilliant shards. Her lips, painted a vivid crimson, were drawn into a predatory smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Those eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over the foyer, then landed on me with an almost palpable disdain. She moved with an astonishing fluidity, a creature of exquisite menace, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm on the marble floor. Mrs. Thorne, usually so impassive, scurried forward, a visible tremor in her usually rigid posture. "Dante?" The woman's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a sliver of ice. Her accent was aristocratic, imperious. She didn't bother to lower it as she scanned the vast, empty space. Then her gaze, cold and unwavering, fixed on me. She paused, one perfectly sculpted eyebrow arching. "And who," she purred, the word a venomous caress, "might you be?" Her eyes, dark and intelligent, devoured me, taking in my simple dress, my sensible shoes, my undeniable youth. I suddenly felt utterly transparent, stripped bare. I opened my mouth, a polite greeting hovering on my tongue, but she cut me off, a dismissive flick of her diamond-encrusted hand. "Never mind," she said, her smile widening, revealing a flash of perfectly white teeth. It was a smile that promised sharp edges and no quarter. Her eyes, however, held no mirth, only a chilling, calculating assessment. She turned then, as if performing for an unseen audience, and swept a hand through the air, encompassing the sprawling, silent opulence of the foyer, and by extension, herself. Her voice, resonant and utterly devoid of warmth, echoed in the vast space, shattering every illusion I had so carefully constructed, every fragile thread of belonging I had begun to weave. "I am Alessia Moretti," she announced, her eyes blazing with an almost savage triumph as they met mine. "Dante's wife." The words were a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs, solidifying the sickening churn in my gut. "Alessia Moretti, Dante's wife." The elegant, damning pronouncement echoed in the vast foyer, each syllable a shard of ice splintering the fragile sense of security I'd begun to cultivate. My vision swam, the glittering diamonds around her throat morphing into predatory eyes. The ruby-red fabric a splash of fresh blood against the pristine marble. The warmth that had bloomed in me during those stolen glances with Dante, that illicit hum beneath my skin, now felt like a scorching brand of shame. I'd been a fool, a naive country mouse captivated by the glint of a serpent's scales. My carefully constructed illusion of a stoic, grieving widower shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, revealing something far more complex, far more dangerous. He hadn't lost his wife. She had merely been elsewhere. The quiet sorrow I'd mistaken for bereavement, the subtle softening of his gaze. It had all been a trick of the light, a projection of my own yearning for connection. My fear of being unessential, of being replaceable, flared with a vicious intensity, threatening to consume me. I was not a solution to anyone's loneliness. I was merely a temporary diversion, a convenient prop in a world I didn't understand. Alessia's chilling smile widened, a silent question in her dark, assessing eyes as she watched the color drain from my face. She didn't need an answer. My mortification was answer enough. Mrs. Thorne, meanwhile, cleared her throat with an almost imperceptible cough, her gaze pointedly fixed on a distant tapestry. It was a silent command to disappear, a stark reminder of my place, or rather, my utter lack of one. I managed to execute a clumsy curtsy, a reflexive gesture of respect I immediately regretted. "Excuse me," I mumbled, my voice a strained whisper, and fled. My sensible shoes, once a comfort, now pounded a frantic rhythm against the marble, carrying me away from the glittering woman, away from the grand, silent house that had suddenly become a trap. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to escape the suffocating weight of her presence. The crushing reality of what I had so recklessly misread. I ended up in the small, rarely used garden I'd discovered, the one where Sophia had allowed me to hold her hand just yesterday. The overgrown roses, their petals still dewy with twilight, seemed to mock me with their fragile beauty. I pressed my palms against the cold stone of an ancient bench, trying to anchor myself, to quiet the frantic drumming of my heart. The air was cool, biting, a stark contrast to the internal inferno consuming me. He found me there, inevitably. I hadn't heard his approach, not over the roar in my ears, but I felt the sudden drop in temperature, the familiar shift in the air that announced his formidable presence. I didn't need to turn to know it was Dante. The faint, dark scent of him, wood smoke and something sharper like polished steel, filled my senses, a dangerous perfume that made every nerve ending hum. Ilara. His voice, when it came, was a low thrum against the stillness, devoid of the harshness I expected, yet infinitely more dangerous for its unexpected calm. I didn't turn. My anger, a fierce protective fire, finally broke through the layers of shame and mortification. How could you? The words ripped from my throat, raw and trembling, a desperate accusation. How could you let me believe? I trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of my foolishness, the magnitude of his deception. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the rustling leaves of a nearby oak. Believe what, Ilara? His tone was neutral, almost detached, yet it held an underlying current of something unyielding, a steely refusal to be swayed by my distress. I finally turned, my eyes blazing, though I knew the effect was likely lost on a man like him, that you were a grieving widower, that this house, that there was a space for me here, for us. I gestured wildly, encompassing the estate, the children, the stolen glances. I thought you were alone. I thought I could help. The last word was a whisper of self-recrimination. He stepped closer, moving with a silent grace that was unnerving. The light was fading, casting his face in shadows, but I could see the hard line of his jaw, the unreadable depths of his eyes. You are helping the children, he stated, his voice a quiet assertion, a declaration. You are good for them. My breath hitched. He dodged the real issue, sidestepped my emotional turmoil, and landed on the one point that would unravel me, the children. He knew. He always knew. That's not enough, I whispered, shaking my head. I can't stay. Not like this. It's wrong. My moral compass, usually so steadfast, was spinning wildly in my chest. I couldn't be a part of this sordid arrangement. A complicit ghost haunting a married man's home. It went against everything I believed, everything I aspired to be. He took another step, closing the distance between us until I could feel the subtle warmth radiating from his formidable frame. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a physical weight, pinning me in place. My marriage to Alessia is a political arrangement, he said, his voice even, stripped of emotion. An alliance forged years ago to consolidate power. It is a contract, Ilara, nothing more, a necessary evil in my world. His gaze, dark and unwavering, bore into mine, demanding I understand, demanding I accept. There was no apology in his voice, no hint of regret for my misunderstanding, only a cold, stark declaration of fact. A contract, I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. And where does that leave me? A pawn in your empire? The accusation, though softly spoken, held the full weight of my hurt and burgeoning resentment. His eyes narrowed fractionally. It leaves you here, he said, the words delivered with an absolute finality that brooked no argument. With my children. Your purpose here remains unchanged. You were hired to be their nanny. You will fulfill that obligation. The subtle possessiveness in his tone, the sheer force of his will, was a shock, a sudden cold wave breaking over my head. It wasn't a request. It was an order, a subtle prevention of my departure, framed not as a demand for my presence, but as an assertion of my existing obligation. He was making it abundantly clear. I was his nanny, and I was not leaving. My throat tightened. I can't. I tried again, though even to my own ears it sounded weak, unconvincing. How could I reconcile my fierce moral objections with the undeniable gravitational pull he exerted? How could I walk away from Leo and Sophia, those two lonely satellites orbiting a distant star? My fear of being unessential warred with a new, terrifying fear, the fear of being truly needed, and of failing to meet that need. A muscle in his jaw clenched, a small telltale sign of the pressure he lived under, the constant burden of his world. In that moment, watching him, I saw past the formidable dawn, past the deception, to a flicker of something profoundly isolated, a necessary evil. His words, devoid of self-pity, painted a stark portrait of his own gilded cage. He was as much a prisoner of his empire as I now felt a prisoner in his home. The realization was a devastating blow, softening the edges of my anger with a sudden, unwanted surge of empathy. "You will not abandon them," he murmured, his voice now lower, almost a plea disguised as a command. "They need you. I need you to be here." The last 4 words, though delivered with the same quiet authority, resonated with an unexpected vulnerability, a raw edge of need that cut through my defenses. It was not an apology, but it was an admission, a crack in his impenetrable facade. A silent civil war raged within my chest, my ingrained sense of right and wrong clashing with the desperate yearning for belonging, the profound connection I felt to his children, and the dangerous, intoxicating allure of the man himself. I said nothing, simply stared at him, my heart a frantic drummer against my ribs. I knew with a chilling certainty that I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not while those 2 small, broken children needed the solace of my music, the steady presence I offered. And not when every fiber of my being, despite the treachery, despite the danger, screamed to stay, to unravel the mystery of this man who was both captor and captived. The next morning, Alessia made her presence immediately, chillingly known. She swept into the breakfast room, a vision of polished perfection in a cream silk suit, her diamonds now replaced with emeralds that gleamed like predatory eyes. Leo and Sophia, usually quiet, were even more so, shrinking into themselves at the far end of the immense dining table. "Ah, the little music box," Alessia purred, her gaze sweeping over me as I tried to coax Sophia to eat her toast. Her voice was like liquid ice, each word a carefully honed weapon. "Still here, I see. I had thought you might have found your humble origins more appealing." My cheeks flushed, a hot wave of shame and indignation washing over me. The barb hit its target, precisely aimed at my core wound, my fear of being overlooked, of being reminded of my lesser status. I swallowed, forcing myself to meet her gaze, though my hand trembled slightly as I cut Leo's waffle. Dante, seated at the head of the table, remained silent, his expression a granite mask. Yet, I felt the shift in the air, the subtle tension that radiated from him. I didn't see his eyes on Alessia, but I felt the silent, heavy warning he was undoubtedly sending. It was a subtle shielding, a palpable presence asserting my protected status, however precarious it might be. "I am employed to care for the children, Mrs. Moretti," I stated, my voice steadier than I felt, a small victory against her acidic remarks. "And I intend to fulfill my duties." Alessia laughed, a light, tinkling sound devoid of genuine amusement. Such admirable dedication, one might almost believe it. Or perhaps. She leaned forward conspiratorially, though her gaze remained fixed on me. "You find the gilded cage more appealing than the university dorm room? A clever girl, after all." The implication hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. I was here not for the children, but for the wealth, for Dante. My blood ran cold, but before I could formulate a response, Dante's voice cut through the silence. Low and dangerous. "Alessia." The single word was a glacial reprimand, a warning delivered with the quiet authority of a man who rarely needed to raise his voice. His gaze, I now saw, was finally on her, narrow and piercing. She merely offered him a saccharine smile, a flicker of defiance in her own eyes, but the message had been delivered. My breathing hitched. He wasn't defending me with words, but with a silent assertion of power, a subtle possessive claim that reverberated through the very air. Later that day, After Alessia had departed for what she vaguely referred to as pressing social engagements, a profound, aching loneliness settled over the house. The children, still subdued, clung to me more tightly than usual, as if sensing the invisible lines of conflict that had been drawn. I spent the afternoon playing the piano, my music a balm against the lingering chill of Alessia's presence. That night, sleep proved elusive. The image of Alessia's cold, knowing eyes haunted my thoughts, replaying her insidious remarks, feeding my insecurities. I tossed and turned, the soft sheets feeling like a tangled web. Eventually, I rose, drawn by an unspoken restlessness, a desperate need for air, for space, for something to quiet the cacophony in my mind. I drifted through the quiet corridors, the moonlight filtering through the tall windows painting the marble floors in shades of silver and shadow. The house in its nocturnal silence felt vast and strangely vulnerable. I found myself drawn, almost without conscious thought, to the study, the room where I often heard Dante's low voice, where he closeted himself away from the world. The door was ajar, a sliver of warm golden light spilling into the dark hall. I hesitated, my heart a hummingbird trapped in my ribcage. Then, compelled by an invisible force, I pushed it open a fraction more. He was there, as I knew he would be. Seated at a massive mahogany desk, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. He wasn't working. He was simply sitting, one hand resting on a stack of leather-bound books, the other cradling a tumbler of amber liquid. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, a rare imperfection. He looked tired, his shoulders heavy, the formidable strength momentarily eclipsed by a profound weariness. His eyes, fixed on some distant, unseen point, held a raw vulnerability I'd never witnessed, a glimpse into the depths of his isolation. He must have sensed my presence, a ripple in the stillness, because his head lifted slowly. His gaze, those fathomless storm clouds, found mine across the dimly lit room. For a long suspended moment, neither of us spoke. The air thickened, charged with an unspoken tension, a palpable hum of forbidden yearning that vibrated between us. My breath caught in my throat. Every nerve ending in my body sprang to acute awareness, a frantic tattoo against my skin. His eyes, usually so guarded, were now a molten pool of emotion. Loneliness, frustration, an undeniable, hungry desire that mirrored the dangerous current surging through my own veins. He didn't move, didn't speak, yet his gaze was a silent language, stripping away my carefully constructed defenses, exposing the raw, aching core of my own longing. It was a dangerous game, this silent communion, this raw, unfiltered exchange of desperate wishes. My body hummed a traitorous melody, a fierce, reckless current that threatened to sweep away every moral objection, every carefully constructed barrier. In his eyes, I saw not just desire, but a recognition, a profound understanding of my own imprisonment, my own yearning to be seen, to be vital. It was a connection born of shared isolation, a dangerous magnetic pull that defied reason, defied morality. I shouldn't want this man, married and dangerous as he was, but God help me, I did. The raw, unspoken longing between us was a living thing, breathing, pulsating in the quiet intimacy of the lamplit room. I tore my gaze away, my cheeks burning, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and an intoxicating, forbidden thrill. I simply couldn't endure the naked intensity of that connection a moment longer. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice a mere breath in the vastness, and retreated, stumbling back into the protective shadows of the hallway. The door clicked shut, severing the connection, but the image of his eyes, dark and yearning, was burned behind my eyelids. The following evening, a heavy pall hung over the estate. Alessia, dressed in shimmering midnight blue silk, presided over the dinner table like a queen on her throne. The children, usually seated at a separate, smaller table, were, for some reason, at the grand dining table with us, a silent testament to Alessia's imperious whims. Leo picked at his food, his small face pale. Sophia, clutching her one-eyed rabbit, kept her eyes glued to her plate. The conversation, if one could call it that, was dominated by Alessia's pronouncements on various society events, interspersed with thinly veiled criticisms of the house staff and the quality of the cuisine. I remained largely silent, answering only when directly addressed, trying to make myself as invisible as possible. "Oh, Alessia suddenly chirped, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, her eyes sparkling with malicious amusement. Dante tells me you're quite the little musician. Do you perhaps entertain the children with those charming little nursery rhymes? Such a sweet distraction for them. Her gaze was dismissive, sweeping over my simple gray dress, the quiet dignity I tried to maintain. My spine stiffened. I play the piano, Mrs. Moretti, I corrected, my voice quiet but firm. Classical pieces mostly, and I teach the children some basic scales. Alessia waved a dismissive hand. Oh, a classical. How quaint. All those dreary composers. I much prefer something with a bit more spirit, something that doesn't remind one of dusty libraries and poverty. Her lips stretched into a condescending smile. But then I suppose it suits your background, doesn't it? Simple melodies for a simple life. One can hardly expect a scholarship girl to appreciate the complexities of true artistry, can one? The air around the table seemed to crystallize. My face burned, a furious blush spreading from my neck to my hairline. The words were a public humiliation, designed to cut, to remind me of my place. My core wound, the fear of being overlooked, of being deemed unessential and worse, inadequate, flared into a raging fire. But it wasn't just my humiliation. I felt the distress radiating from the children. Leo's small hand trembled as he gripped his fork, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and hurt. Sophia's bottom lip quivered, and a single crystal tear tracked a path down her pale cheek, landing on the threadbare fur of her rabbit. She glanced at me, her small face a picture of silent suffering. My anger, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, overshadowed my shame. Alessia hadn't just insulted me. She had wounded the children. My gaze lifted, seeking Dante. His face was a study in controlled fury. The granite lines had deepened, carving his features into a mask of pure, concentrated rage. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle pulsed beneath the skin. But it was his eyes that held the true terror. They were no longer storm clouds, no longer molten pools. They were shards of obsidian, cold and utterly devoid of mercy. His gaze, slow and deadly, detached itself from my burning face, bypassed the distressed children, and settled, with an almost chilling deliberation, on Alessia. The promise of retribution, silent and absolute, hung in the heavy air between them, a cold, terrifying certainty that made my blood run cold. The air in the dining room had curdled, thick with unspoken violence. Alessia's words, intended to scorch, had succeeded, leaving behind a bitter ash taste on my tongue. My face burned, a furious shame scalding my skin. But it was Sophia's trembling lip, Leo's terrified stillness, that twisted the shame into something colder, harder, a protective fury. My gaze, filled with a sudden, unbidden ferocity, had found Dante, and I saw his own rage, cold and absolute, directed not at me, but at his wife. The promise of retribution in his obsidian eyes was a stark, chilling thing, a glimpse into a power that both terrified and oddly, dangerously, captivated me. The silence that followed Alessia's cruel pronouncement was more deafening than any shout. It stretched, taut and suffocating, until Dante finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he placed his fork down beside his plate. The faint clink echoed in the vast room, a small sound that somehow amplified the tension. His eyes, still locked on Alessia, were chips of polished flint. "Enough," he stated, the word a low growl that vibrated with an authority so absolute it seemed to command the very air. It wasn't loud, but it cut through Alessia's smug satisfaction like a honed blade. She flinched, almost imperceptibly, a flicker of surprise and then simmering resentment crossing her exquisite features. Dante then did something that stole the breath from my lungs. He reached across the expansive table, not towards me but towards Sophia. His large hand, usually so tightly controlled, gently covered her small, trembling one, which was still clutching the one-eyed rabbit. He said nothing, but the gesture was a thunderclap. It was a silent acknowledgement of her pain, a stark public rebuke to Alessia for causing it, and then, his gaze, still holding a dangerous edge, swept from Sophia to Leo, lingering just long enough to convey a silent promise of safety. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic captive in its bone cage. He wasn't just protecting the children, he was protecting me by extension. By defending their vulnerability, he asserted that my presence, my music, my connection to them, was not only valid, but cherished. A complicated tangle of emotions erupted within me. Gratitude, fear, a dizzying surge of illicit warmth, and a terrifying, unwanted exhilaration. Alessia's crimson lips thinned, her eyes flashing with pure, unadulterated venom. The saccharine smile vanished, replaced by a mask of furious indignation. "Dante," she began, her voice a sharp demand, "are you truly condoning this? Insolence? This common girl's lack of respect." He finally tore his gaze from her, turning it to me. And in that moment, for the briefest fraction of a second, something shifted in his eyes. A flash of something that looked like regret, quickly masked by his usual guarded reserve. "Miss Vance is a valued member of this household," he stated, his voice a steady, unwavering force. "Her role is essential to the well-being of my children. Her background is irrelevant." Each word was a definitive stroke, erasing Alessia's carefully crafted humiliation, solidifying my place, not just as a nanny, but as someone under his protection. He didn't apologize, didn't explain. He simply declared, and in his world, his declarations were law. He then pushed his chair back, the scrape a harsh sound in the quiet room. "The evening is concluded," he announced, his gaze sweeping over the table with an air of absolute finality. "Alessia, I require your presence in my study. Miss Vance, please see to the children." It was a dismissal for Alessia and a command for me, but woven into the command was an implicit trust, a reaffirmation of my role. I watched, numb, as Dante rose, his formidable presence filling the vast space. Alessia, stiff with fury, rose to follow him, her elegant back ramrod straight, her heels clicking a furious rhythm that seemed to challenge his authority. She cast one last scathing look over her shoulder at me, a silent promise of future torment that chilled me to the bone. I spent the rest of the evening in a haze, soothing Sophia's lingering sniffles, reading Leo a story until his tense shoulders finally relaxed. My hands trembled slightly as I tucked them into their beds, the scent of lavender and baby skin, a fragile comfort against the storm raging inside me. Dante had defended me. He had chosen, unequivocally, to assert my worth against his wife's cruelty. The gesture, though public and undeniably powerful, was also terrifying. It branded me, a visible target for Alessia's wrath. It drew me deeper into the treacherous currents of this house, this family, this man. The internal civil war raged. My moral compass screamed bloody murder. He was a married man. This was wrong. But then, the counter-melody hummed, seductive and insistent. The way his hand had covered Sophia's. The quiet authority in his voice. The sheer force of his will that had shielded me. He hadn't just protected me. He had claimed me in his own silent, possessive way. And the truth, raw and inconvenient, pulsed beneath my skin. I didn't want to leave. I couldn't. Not when his children, small and adrift, needed me, and not when the man himself, despite the danger he represented, despite the lies, stirred a yearning within me that felt both sacred and profane. He was a storm, and I, a fragile moth, found myself drawn to his dangerous light. I was falling, undeniably and terrifyingly, for Dante Moretti. Over the next few days, Alessia's fury simmered beneath a veneer of icy politeness, a constant, low-level hum of animosity that permeated the very walls of the estate. Her interactions with me were brief, punctuated by subtle digs and condescending smiles that promised worse to come. Dante, for his part, remained a distant, formidable presence, often absent from the house, or closeted in his study, the sounds of hushed, intense conversations sometimes filtering through the thick doors. But his gaze, when it found mine across the dining room or in the sprawling corridors, held a new weight, a silent intensity that spoke of unspoken things, of a fragile pact sealed in the heat of a public confrontation. One afternoon, I was guiding Leo through a difficult piano lesson, his small fingers fumbling with a scale, when a sudden jarring noise erupted from downstairs. It was a guttural shout, followed by a heavy thud, and then a rapid-fire exchange of voices, sharp and menacing, in a language I didn't understand. Leo's head snapped up, his eyes wide with fear, his small body tensing. Sophia, who had been quietly drawing beside the piano, dropped her crayon with a clatter. "What was that?" Leo whispered, his voice trembling. My own heart was racing, a frantic percussion against my ribs. I knew instinctively that this was the darker aspect of Dante's world. This wasn't a family squabble. It was something far more brutal, far more dangerous. The polite facade of the Moretti estate had cracked, revealing the shadowed machinery beneath. "It's just some men talking downstairs, Leo," I said, trying to infuse my voice with a calm I didn't feel. I stood, moving towards the door, my hand hovering on the polished wood. I knew I shouldn't pry, shouldn't venture into the private world of the Don. But a terrible curiosity, a magnetic pull towards the danger he embodied, propelled me forward, and a desperate, foolish need to understand the man who had so unexpectedly, so fiercely defended me. "Stay here," I murmured to the children, my voice barely audible. "Keep playing." I pushed the door open just a crack, peering out into the long, silent corridor. The sounds were coming from the grand reception hall, a space usually reserved for formal events. The low hum of menacing voices was now interspersed with the occasional sharp crack of a slap, the rasp of a harsh cough. My blood ran cold. I moved silently, my sensible shoes making no sound on the ancient rugs. As I neared the archway that led to the reception hall, the scene within unfurled like a grim tapestry. The vast room, usually flooded with light, was now dim, the heavy velvet drapes drawn. In the center Dante stood, a dark, commanding figure. He was surrounded by a semicircle of men, their faces hard, their suits impeccably tailored, yet their eyes held a feral intensity. They were not his employees, not his friends. They were wolves, dangerous and coiled, but even they seemed to shrink beneath Dante's gaze. He held a man by the lapels of his suit, twisting the fabric until the man's face was contorted in pain. Dante's expression was colder than marble, his eyes devoid of any human warmth, two pools of absolute, terrifying power. The man he held was pale, sweating, stammering apologies in a desperate, broken stream. Dante said nothing, simply watched him, his silence more chilling than any shouted threat. Then with a sudden violent shove he flung the man away, sending him sprawling to the floor. "You understand the consequences of your carelessness," Dante finally uttered, his voice low, almost conversational, yet it was laced with a venomous steel that made every hair on my arms stand on end. "This is not a negotiation. This is a reminder. You deal with me, you deal with my rules. And my rules are absolute." The fallen man scrambled to his feet, bowing and scraping, his pleas muffled by the sheer force of Dante's presence. I watched, frozen in the shadows, my heart lodged somewhere in my throat. This was the true Dante Moretti, the ruthless Don, the man who commanded not just wealth, but fear. This was the man who had forged an empire with an iron fist, a man capable of truly terrifying things. Every instinct screamed for me to flee, to run from this opulent, dangerous cage. He was a predator, a force of nature, and I was utterly, foolishly out of my depth. Yet, even amidst the terror, a strange, undeniable magnetism tugged at me. There was something intoxicating in his raw, untamed power, in the sheer force of his will. He was a dark, dangerous king, and for a fleeting, treacherous moment, I felt a dizzying pull to kneel at his feet, to be enveloped by his formidable protection, to be a small part of his vast, terrifying world. My body hummed with a primal recognition of strength, a response I shouldn't feel, a desire that was utterly forbidden. He was not just my protector. He was my potential captor, and the line between the two blurred with alarming speed. I retreated as silently as I had arrived, my mind reeling. My hands felt clammy, my knees weak. I reached the children's wing, closing the door behind me with a soft click, leaning against it as if to prevent the darkness from seeping in. Leo and Sophia, thank heavens, were still engrossed in their music. I sank onto the piano bench, my fingers shaking as I attempted to play a simple, calming melody. The notes felt hollow, fragile against the terrifying tableau I had just witnessed. That night, I was a coiled spring, unable to find rest. The image of Dante's cold, ruthless eyes, the raw, brutal power radiating from him, was seared into my mind. I saw him not as the stoic widower I had first imagined, nor even just the lonely man in his study, but as a complex, dangerous mosaic of both, and something far more primal. He was a force to be reckoned with, a man who lived by his own terrifying code, But also, I saw his imprisonment. His words, a necessary evil in my world, now resonated with a chilling clarity. Alessia was not just his wife. She was a symbol of his chains, a gilded cage he endured for the sake of his empire, for his children. He was not a free man, despite his power. And the realization solidified something deep within me, crystallizing the wild, contradictory emotions that had been swirling for weeks. I loved him. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing my breath, leaving me breathless and aching. It was a terrifying, impossible, utterly reckless love, but it was undeniable. I was falling for a man who belonged to another. A man steeped in a world of violence and shadows. A man who could command fear with a single look. Every moral fiber in my being screamed at the depravity of it, the impossible nature of it, the sheer danger. But my heart, traitorous and defiant, beat a fierce rhythm that sang only his name. I was his captive in more ways than one, and strangely, irrevocably, I wanted to be. The need to see him, to understand him, to be near him, became a physical ache. I paced my small room, the elegant furnishings suddenly feeling claustrophobic. My gaze kept drifting to the window, to the distant glow of light from his study. I needed to bridge the chasm between the ruthless Don and the man whose gaze held such surprising depths. Eventually, the restlessness became unbearable. I slipped from my room, the silence of the mansion a shroud around me. My footsteps were a whisper on the polished floors as I made my way towards the study, an invisible thread pulling me forward. The door this time was closed, but a sliver of light still escaped from beneath it. I paused, my hand hovering, my breath held. The air thrummed with unspoken tension, with the ghost of my own forbidden desire. As if sensing my presence, the door slowly, silently, swung open. Dante stood there, framed in the lamplight, his dark hair falling across his forehead, his shirt collar unbuttoned, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin. His eyes, those fathomless depths, met mine across the threshold. The ruthless Dawn was gone, replaced by the man I'd seen in the garden, the man whose gaze held a desperate, aching vulnerability. The air between us crackled, thick with unspoken words, with the weight of raw, hungry emotion. There was no pretense, no masks, just two souls suspended in a moment of terrifying, illicit honesty. He didn't speak. He simply reached out, his hand extending into the space between us, a silent invitation, a desperate plea. My heart leaped into my throat, a frantic bird seeking release. Every cell in my body responded to that unspoken call, that magnetic pull that defied reason. My own hand, trembling, found his fingers, long and strong, closed around mine, a possessive, grounding grip that sent a jolt of heat racing up my arm. He pulled me gently, steadily into the room, then released my hand, only to cup my face in both of his. His thumb stroked my cheekbones, a tender, devastating touch that elicited a soft gasp from my lips. His eyes, dark and turbulent, searched mine, stripping away every defense, every carefully constructed barrier. In their depths, I saw my own desperate longing reflected, magnified, intensified. He lowered his head slowly, inexorably, his gaze never leaving mine, until his breath mingled with mine, warm and intoxicating. "Alara," he murmured, his voice a low, rough rasp, a raw confession in itself. My name on his lips was a caress, a brand, a promise. Then his mouth descended, claiming mine in a kiss that was both desperate and devastating. It wasn't gentle, not tender, but fierce, demanding, a silent explosion of everything we hadn't dared to speak. His lips were hot, urgent, tasting of whiskey and desperation, a potent combination that shattered every remaining pretense, every moral objection. My body responded without thought, arching into his, my hands finding purchase on his shoulders, gripping the solid strength of him. It was a kiss of raw, forbidden hunger, a desperate communion of two souls starved for genuine connection in a world of artifice. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me impossibly closer until there was no space left between us, only the searing heat of our bodies, the frantic rhythm of our hearts beating as one. I forgot the danger, forgot Alessia, forgot everything but the overwhelming, intoxicating sensation of his lips on mine, his body pressed against mine. A desperate merging that spoke volumes of a hunger that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. This was it. This was the precipice, and I was falling, willingly, irrevocably, into the dark. dangerous chasm of him. After what felt like an eternity, he broke the kiss, pulling back just enough for our foreheads to rest against each other. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged, his hand still cradling the back of my head, his fingers tangled in my hair. "Mine," he whispered, a guttural, possessive utterance that vibrated through me, a primal claim that resonated deep in my bones. My eyes fluttered open, meeting his. They were still dark, still turbulent, but now held a fierce, possessive glow. There was no turning back. The kiss had irrevocably altered something between us, shattering the fragile walls we had both maintained. I was his, and he was mine, in this stolen moment, in this silent, desperate understanding. A sudden sharp sound from the hallway ripped through the fragile intimacy of our moment. A female voice, cold and clear, carried clearly through the thick walls. It was Alessia. "You fool," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. "Do you truly believe I haven't noticed? That little scholarship girl of yours prancing around with the children, playing her simplistic melodies? She is a weakness, Dante. A glaring, undeniable weakness." There was a pause, a significant silence that stretched, pregnant with menace. "And a very useful one. You might think you have secrets, my dear husband, but you underestimate me. Her presence here, her connection to your little family, it's all the leverage I need. I wonder what your friends would make of your sentimental attachments, what they would do if they knew. About the ledger, for instance. Or perhaps the offshore accounts that aren't quite as offshore as you'd like them to believe. Your carefully constructed empire, Dante. It's far more fragile than you imagine. And she." Alessia's voice dropped to a chilling whisper, sharp and deadly as a poisoned blade. "She will be its undoing." The words, like venomous shrapnel, lodged deep within me. Leverage, undoing. My blood ran cold, fear, sharp and immediate, eclipsing the lingering heat of Dante's kiss. A secret, a ledger, offshore accounts, his empire, my presence, my connection to the children, all linked, all dangerous. A sudden, terrifying clarity washed over me. Alessia wasn't just threatening Dante. She was threatening me, and the danger, vast and unseen, now reached far beyond a broken heart. It stretched into the very fabric of Dante's dark, brutal world, threatening to unravel everything, and to destroy me in the process. Dante's body went rigid against mine. The subtle tension in his frame, a clear indication that Alessia's words had struck a nerve, perhaps even more than I could comprehend. His eyes, which moments before had held such raw hunger, now blazed with a cold fury directed outward, beyond our intimate bubble, towards the source of the insidious threat. The transformation was startling, a stark reminder of the dangerous world he inhabited. He pulled away from me, gently but decisively, his hand still cupping the back of my head, holding me close for a brief, reassuring second before he released me. His gaze swept over my face, searching, assessing, a silent question in their depths. Then, with a curt nod that conveyed both warning and protection, he turned and stepped through the doorway, disappearing into the shadowed hallway. The sound of his rapid, decisive footsteps, followed by the muffled but clear clang of a door closing, confirmed his departure. He was going to confront her, or worse. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, caught between the lingering tenderness of his touch and the chilling reality of Alessia's ominous words. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. The image of Dante's molten eyes, the frantic desperation of our kiss, battled with Alessia's chilling voice, her promise of destruction. Each rustle of leaves outside my window, each creak of the old house, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. The estate, once a place I yearned to belong, now felt like a gilded trap, its opulence a deceptive veil over a festering darkness. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the Moretti household shifted, becoming thick with an unspoken tension that permeated every stone, every whisper. Alessia remained, a predatory orchid in silk and jewels, her presence a constant oppressive weight. Her interactions with me were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Subtle snubs, dismissive glances, a raised eyebrow that conveyed volumes of contempt, and the occasional, carefully casual remark about the fragility of outsiders in a world like this. She never directly mentioned the ledger or the offshore accounts again, but her eyes held a knowing glint, a silent promise that the threat was not forgotten, merely simmering, Dante, conversely, became a phantom. He was rarely seen, his study door often closed, the hushed murmurs of his conversation sometimes drifting through the thick wood. But his influence was palpable. Security around the estate tightened, almost imperceptibly at first, then more overtly. New faces, stern and silent, appeared among the household staff, their gazes sharp and watchful. My movements were no longer unobserved. A subtle presence followed me, never intrusive, always distant, yet undeniably there. It was Dante's quiet assertion of control, his shield, but it also made me feel like a prisoner, a piece of precious, fragile cargo to be guarded. The children, sensing the pervasive anxiety, grew even more withdrawn, retreating further into themselves, clinging to the solace of my music, with a quiet desperation that mirrored my own. My piano became a refuge, its melodies a fragile barrier against the encroaching shadows. My longing for genuine connection warred constantly with the growing fear. I craved the brief, charged glances with Dante, the silent understanding that passed between us. Yet I recoiled from the danger that followed him like a shadow. His protection, once a comfort, now felt like a cage being built around me. I understood the cost of loving him, the sheer magnitude of the world he inhabited, and the frightening implications for someone like me, a simple scholarship girl. My fear of being replaceable, of being unessential, had morphed into a terrifying realization that I was now dangerously essential, a vulnerability to be exploited. One chilly afternoon, I decided I needed to escape the suffocating weight of the house, if only for an hour. I needed fresh air, a moment of normal. My university library had a specific text I needed for an upcoming exam, a small errand I clung to as a vestige of my old life. I told Mrs. Thorne, who merely offered a terse nod. I slipped out a side gate, the one closest to the quiet tree-lined road, feeling a momentary rush of freedom, a foolish sense of autonomy. The autumn air bit at my cheeks, invigorating and sharp. I walked quickly, eager to shake off the clinging unease of the estate. The trees lining the country lane were skeletal, their bare branches scratching against the bruised sky. I was perhaps a mile from the main gates, enjoying the simple rhythm of my footsteps on the gravel, when a sleek, dark sedan, unfamiliar to me, cruised past, then slowed, pulling over to the side of the road ahead. My breath hitched. Every instinct screamed wrong. The car was too perfectly polished, too silent, too out of place on this secluded lane. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. I picked up my pace, a sudden cold dread washing over me. Just as I drew level with the idling vehicle, the passenger door swung open with unnerving swiftness. A man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the brim of a dark hat. He moved with a practiced economy of motion, his hand reaching out, not to grasp, but to block my path. Another man, equally formidable, appeared from the driver's side. "Miss Vance?" The first man's voice was a low rumble, devoid of inflection. It was not a question, but a statement of recognition. My blood ran cold. They knew who I was. Alessia. The thought flashed through my mind like a searing brand. I tried to step around him, my heart now a wild, trapped bird. I don't know you," I stammered, my voice a thin, reedy sound, barely audible above the sudden, deafening roar in my ears. The man merely smiled, a slow, humorless baring of teeth. "Mr. Moretti sends his regards," he said, the lie a palpable thing hanging in the cold air. He'd like a word, a private conversation. His hand, encased in a dark leather glove, wrapped around my arm, not painfully, but with an iron grip that permitted no escape. Panic surged, cold and all-consuming. This wasn't a conversation. This was an abduction. My life, my carefully constructed future, the fragile sense of belonging I had begun to feel, it all teetered on the brink of an abyss. My mind raced, conjuring images of Dante, his face etched with fury, his eyes like obsidian shards. He was a dangerous man, but his danger was protective, directed outward. These men, however, felt like pure, unadulterated menace, a faceless threat unleashed by Alessia's poisoned machinations. I struggled, a futile, desperate twitch against the unyielding strength of his grip. "Let me go," I cried out, the words raw, tearing from my throat. but the sound was swallowed by the vast, silent countryside. The second man had moved around me, cutting off any escape, his presence a dark, suffocating shadow. "No fuss, Miss Vance," the first man murmured, his voice now a low, chilling command. "Just get in the car." He began to propel me forward, a relentless force. My legs felt like lead, heavy and unresponsive. Every instinct screamed for me to fight, to run, but my body was paralyzed by an icy fear. This was it. This was the cost. And in that moment of absolute terror, as the dark interior of the sedan loomed, as the raw reality of peril washed over me, a startling clarity pierced through the haze of fear. It wasn't my tuition, or even my future at the university, that pulsed with such fierce importance. It was Dante. It was Leo and Sophia. It was the music that had begun to mend broken spaces, the fragile hope for a found family. The thought of never seeing their small faces again, of never feeling the quiet intensity of Dante's gaze, was a pain far more acute than any physical threat. My fear of being overlooked, of being unessential, faded into insignificance. I was essential to them, and they were essential to me. This dangerous, chaotic, forbidden life with Dante was the one I wanted. I would risk everything. My moral compass, once spinning wildly, now pointed true, sharp and unwavering towards him. My love for Dante, once a secret, forbidden current, roared to life, a fierce, blazing fire in the face of absolute darkness. Suddenly, a cacophony of sound ripped through the quiet air. The roar of powerful engines, the screech of tires, the urgent blast of horns. My captors froze, their attention snapping to the road behind us. My head instinctively turned. A convoy of black SUVs, dark and menacing, appeared around the bend, moving with an almost military precision. They were not ordinary vehicles. They were tanks on wheels, their tinted windows impenetrable, their presence radiating an undeniable, formidable power. They swerved, cutting off the dark sedan, trapping it against the roadside embankment. Before the first man could react, his grip still tight on my arm, the doors of the SUVs burst open. Men, more men than I could count, spilled out. They were dressed in dark suits, their movements swift, efficient, and utterly ruthless. They were Dante's men. There was no doubt. Their faces were grim, their eyes cold and focused, each one a coiled spring of controlled aggression. My captors didn't stand a chance. It was over in a matter of seconds, a blur of motion, a guttural grunt, the sickening thud of a body hitting metal. The man holding me was yanked away with such force that my arm screamed in protest, but the pain was quickly eclipsed by a surge of dizzying relief. I stumbled, my knees giving out, bracing myself for the impact, when strong arms caught me. Dante. He held me against him, his formidable body a bulwark against the chaos that erupted around us. His arms, usually so controlled, were now crushing, possessive, shaking almost imperceptibly. His face, when I looked up, was a mask of cold fury, but beneath it, in the depths of his storm cloud eyes, I saw something else. Raw, unadulterated terror. He had been afraid. For me, the realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave, washing away the last vestiges of doubt, the last whisper of moral objection. His guard was completely down, exposing a profound, aching vulnerability that stunned me. He wasn't just a powerful man. He was a man who truly, deeply, terrifyingly, could not bear to lose me. His love was undeniable. "Ilara," he rasped, his voice raw, rough with emotion. "Are you hurt? Tell me." His hand swept over my face, my arms, his touch gentle yet frantic, a desperate search for injury. The danger he exuded was now a terrifyingly beautiful thing, entirely directed towards my protection. I shook my head, tears finally stinging my eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming flood of relief, of love. "No," I choked out. "I'm okay. You came." The words felt inadequate, hollow against the magnitude of his presence, his rescue. He pulled me closer, burying his face in my hair, his body trembling. It was a rare, shocking display of vulnerability from a man who presented himself as an impenetrable fortress. "I would burn the world for you," he murmured against my temple, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from him. a raw, fervent confession that bypassed my mind and settled deep into my very bones. Don't you understand? You are not just essential. You are everything. My light in this darkness. I won't lose you. Not now. Not ever. The confession hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of solitude, of unspoken yearning. It was not a polished declaration, but a visceral, desperate plea, a stripping away of all pretense. He yearned for a life with me, free from the facades, the political contracts, the carefully constructed walls that had defined his existence. My name on his lips, woven with such raw emotion, was a brand, a promise, a future unfolding. He lifted his head, his eyes, still blazing with a possessive fire, meeting mine. The world around us, the skirmish with the men, the dark SUVs, faded into irrelevance. There was only us, suspended in this moment of terrifying, absolute clarity. His hand moved to my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheekbone, a tender gesture amidst the chaos. "Come home, Alara," he whispered, his gaze pleading, demanding. "Come home to me." He led me to one of the SUVs, his arm wrapped tightly around my waist, his men clearing a path with silent deference. I was numb, my body vibrating with the aftermath of terror and the intoxicating surge of his confession. The ride back to the estate was a blur. I remember leaning into his side, finding an anchor in his unwavering strength, his scent, dark and comforting, filling my senses. He never released me, his hand a constant reassuring weight on my thigh. Once inside the estate, he bypassed the glaring housekeeper, the hushed staff, and led me directly to his private suite, a space I had never dared to imagine. It was vast, opulent, yet surprisingly stark, masculine, devoid of the soft touches that might have made it a home. He closed the heavy door behind us, the click a definitive severing of our connection to the outside world, to the dangers that still lurked. The air was charged, thick with unspoken longing and the lingering adrenaline of my rescue. He turned to me, his gaze intense, possessive, stripping away my remaining defenses. "Are you truly unharmed?" he asked again, his voice softer now, laced with a tremor that betrayed the depth of his fear. He reached out, his fingers tracing the faint red marks on my arm where the man had gripped me. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a primal sound of suppressed violence. I leaned into his touch, my body humming, my heart aching with a love so profound it hurt. "I'm fine, Dante. Because of you." He pulled me against him, crushing me in an embrace that spoke of desperation, of relief, of a passion that had been simmering for too long. His lips found mine, not in a gentle exploration, but in an explosive, demanding kiss that devoured me whole. It was a desperate merging, a primal communion of bodies and souls, fueled by the adrenaline of near loss and the undeniable force of our burgeoning love. His mouth moved over mine with an urgency that stole my breath, his tongue tasting of fire and need. My hands, trembling, tangled in his dark hair, pulling him closer, deeper, until there was no thought, no separation, only the fierce, consuming hunger that erupted between us. He broke the kiss only to drag his lips down my jaw, along my throat, scattering a trail of searing heat. "You are mine, Alara," he rasped against my skin, his voice rough with yearning. "Only mine." My answer was a strangled gasp, a desperate whisper of his name as his hands found the hem of my dress, tracing a path upward, sparking a wildfire beneath my skin. His touch was not merely physical. It was a profound act of intimacy, a silent promise of absolute claim, a sealing of our commitment in the face of the dangerous reality that surrounded us. This was not merely lust. It was a defiant assertion of life, of connection, of our shared humanity against the cold, calculated world that sought to destroy us. Every touch, every kiss, every ragged breath was a testament to the fact that we had chosen each other, undeniably, irrevocably, beyond all reason and morality. He lifted me into his arms, carrying me effortlessly, as if I weighed nothing, towards the vast, opulent bed that dominated the room. He laid me down gently, his eyes never leaving mine, a silent dialogue of profound vulnerability and absolute trust passing between us. He shed his clothes with a rapid urgency, his body a formidable sculpture of muscle and power, his gaze never breaking from mine. Then he was beside me, pulling me against the heated length of him, skin to skin, a searing connection that made every cell in my body sing. The consummation of our love was not a quiet affair. It was an explosive unraveling of years of loneliness, of guarded hearts, a desperate joining that spoke of healing and belonging. Each thrust was a silent vow, each gasp a fervent promise, solidifying a bond that transcended the physical, becoming an intertwining of destinies. In the embrace of his arms, amidst the raw urgency of our shared passion, I found a home, a sanctuary, a reason to risk everything. I was seen, I was valued, and I was, finally, irrevocably, his. The dawn broke, painting the opulent suite in shades of soft gold, casting long, intimate shadows across the rumpled sheets. I lay nestled against Dante, his arm a heavy, protective weight across my waist, his steady breathing a comforting rhythm against my ear. The world outside, with its dangers and its demands, felt distant, held at bay by the warmth of his presence. Our bodies, still entwined, spoke of a night of profound connection, a breaking of walls, a forging of an unbreakable bond. The consummation of our love had been an act of desperate commitment, a silent promise whispered in the darkness, a defiant assertion of life and love against the shadows that threatened to consume us. He stirred, his grip tightening imperceptibly. I shifted, my fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw, feeling the slight stubble beneath my touch. He opened his eyes, those fathomless depths now softened by sleep and lingering passion. A rare, tender smile touched his lips, a fleeting curve that melted something deep within me. He pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "Good morning, Alara," he murmured, his voice husky with sleep, yet laced with a new tenderness, a quiet possessiveness that thrilled me. "Good morning, Dante," I whispered back, my voice thick with emotion, unable to articulate the profound shift that had occurred between us. The fear was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, undeniable joy. I was here, with him. And for the first time in my life, I truly felt like I belonged, that I was essential. Later that morning, after a quick, silent breakfast where Dante's men stood guard with an almost imperceptible vigilance, he led me to a large, imposing room on the ground floor. It was a space I had only glimpsed from a distance, its heavy oak doors usually closed. This was the nerve center of his operations, I realized, the heart of the Moretti Empire. The air crackled with a palpable tension. Around a vast, polished table sat a handful of men, Dante's inner circle, their faces grim, their expressions unreadable. They were the men of power, of influence, the silent architects of his world. Their gazes, sharp and assessing, landed on me as we entered, a mixture of surprise and cold appraisal. I felt a tremor run through me, a familiar surge of self-consciousness. But then Dante's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a public, possessive gesture that both shocked and grounded me. He didn't just lead me into the room. He pulled me to his side, his body a shield, his presence a clear declaration of my importance. The men's expressions shifted, a flicker of something akin to understanding, perhaps even unease, crossing their features. Dante stood at the head of the table, his formidable presence commanding the room. He didn't release my hand, his grip firm and unwavering. His gaze swept over the faces of his most trusted advisors, his eyes cold, resolute, utterly determined. "Gentlemen," Dante began, his voice a low, gravelly current that filled the vast room, carrying an undeniable weight of authority. It was the voice of the dawn, the man who commanded respect, fear, and absolute loyalty. "I have called you here for an urgent matter of the highest importance." He paused, his gaze lingering on each man, then finally settling on me, a deep, unwavering connection in his eyes that spoke volumes. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic premonition building in my chest. This was it. The precipice. "Effective immediately," Dante declared, his voice cutting through the heavy silence, each word a hammer blow of absolute finality. "My political marriage to Alessia is dissolved. I will make the necessary arrangements. There will be consequences. Resistance will be met with the full force of my authority." His gaze then swept across his inner circle, daring any of them to challenge his pronouncement. His hand tightened around mine, a silent, powerful claim, anchoring me to his side, to his future, to the monumental decision he had just made. From this day forward, he continued, his eyes, dark and resolute, finding mine, then encompassing me fully with his possessive gaze, Alara will stand by my side. She is my chosen partner, and the future of this family and this empire will be built with her. The declaration hung in the air, a shocking, irreversible pronouncement that promised to ignite a storm of unprecedented proportions, reshaping his empire, his life, and irrevocably intertwining it with mine. The silence that followed Dante's declaration was not empty. It was a pressurized vacuum, humming with unspoken outrage. The men around the table, a tableau of power and hardened resolve, stiffened. Their carefully neutral expressions cracked, revealing fleeting glimpses of shock, disbelief, and a simmering, dangerous defiance. My hand, still clasped in Dante's, felt like a beacon, drawing their collective venomous scrutiny. I was the interloper, the catalyst, the audacious scholarship girl who had dared to stand at the Don's side as he dismantled his world. My stomach clenched, a cold knot of apprehension tightening with each passing second. But I refused to shrink. Not now. Not when Dante had staked his claim so unequivocally. His grip on my fingers tightened almost imperceptibly. A silent reassurance, a firm anchor in the swirling current of animosity. He met each man's gaze, his own an unyielding challenge, daring them to speak, to question his authority. The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of generations of tradition and expectation, now shattered by a single audacious pronouncement. These men, his most trusted, had known Alessia. They understood the political architecture of her marriage to Dante, the intricate web of alliances it represented. To dissolve it, and for me, a girl from nothing, a nanny, was not merely a personal decision. It was a political earthquake, promising to destabilize the very foundations of his empire. A man at the far end of the table, older, with a face like carved oak, cleared his throat. "Dante," he began, his voice raspy, a low current of disapproval. "This is unexpected. The implications are vast. Alessia's family will not stand idly by. This is a betrayal of the highest order, a disruption that could weaken us." The word "us" hung in the air, a thinly veiled accusation, challenging Dante's judgment, his loyalty to the collective. Dante's gaze, which had been resting on the man, hardened further, a flicker of something predatory, something truly chilling ignited in their depths. "My decisions are not for debate, Marco," he stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded immediate, absolute attention. "My strength is not measured by the alliances of others, but by the resolve of my own convictions. Any perceived weakness will be swiftly, brutally corrected." He paused, his eyes sweeping over each man again, lingering just long enough to convey the unspoken threat. "Alessia's family will be dealt with. Their alliance was always one of convenience, not loyalty. And my determination to protect what is mine." His thumb brushed over my knuckles, a small, possessive gesture that felt monumental in the charged atmosphere, "is absolute. No one weakens me. No one." The declaration hung in the air, each word a hammer blow against their unspoken resistance. He hadn't just announced his intent. He had issued a direct challenge, forcing them to choose between their ingrained traditions and their unyielding fealty to him. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but a strange, exhilarating current surged through me. This was the Dante I had glimpsed in the reception hall, the ruthless Don, but now his formidable power was wielded not just for empire, but for us. For me. And for his children. The meeting continued, a tense, fraught discussion of logistics, countermeasures, and political maneuvering. I remained silent, a silent witness to a world I was still trying to comprehend, a world that was now irrevocably mine. Dante's hand never left mine, a constant, tangible connection, a quiet defiance against the simmering dissent in the room. He spoke with an authority that brooked no argument, laying out his plans with a chilling precision, anticipating every possible repercussion, every potential threat. He was a master strategist, a king surveying his battlefield, preparing for war, and I, inexplicably, found a strange solace in his unwavering resolve, a defiant strength in my commitment to stand by him, no matter the cost. My previous fear of being unessential had evaporated, replaced by the profound, terrifying realization that I was now inextricably woven into the very fabric of his dangerous life, a vulnerability he had chosen to expose and fiercely protect. The fallout was indeed immediate, a relentless barrage of challenges that slammed into the Moretti Empire like a tidal wave. The first ripple came from Alessia's family, a powerful, old-money dynasty whose influence stretched into every corner of the city's political and financial spheres. Whispers turned to veiled threats, anonymous leaks to news outlets hinting at Dante's alleged instability, his reckless disregard for tradition. Investments were suddenly pulled, long-standing contracts mysteriously terminated. Each day brought a new challenge, a subtle but insidious chipping away at Dante's carefully constructed power. I watched him, mesmerized, as he navigated the escalating storm. He moved through the opulence of the estate like a dark, unyielding force, his presence a quiet constant amidst the growing turmoil. His study became a war room, filled with maps, documents, and the hushed, urgent voices of his men. The formidable Don, the man I had first perceived as untouchable, now felt more human, more burdened than ever before. He was under immense pressure, yet he never faltered, never displayed a hint of doubt. His focus remained laser-sharp, his resolve absolute. My days were a delicate balance, maintaining a semblance of normalcy for Leo and Sophia, shielding them from the underlying tension, and finding ways to support Dante. My music became more vital than ever, a balm for their anxious spirits, a fragile haven in a house that felt increasingly besieged. I played for them, for myself, and sometimes, late at night, I played for him, the melodies echoing through the quiet corridors, a silent message of steadfast presence. One evening, I found him in his study, staring out at the rain-streaked gardens, his silhouette stark against the window. He held a glass of whiskey, its amber liquid glinting in the low light. But he wasn't drinking. He was simply staring, the weariness etched around his eyes, the subtle slump of his broad shoulders spoke of a profound burden. My heart anched for him, a deep, resonant throb that surprised me with its intensity. He was not just the dangerous Don. He was a man carrying the weight of an entire world. I walked to him, my footsteps soft on the thick rug, and simply placed my hand on the small of his back. His body, usually rigid, responded with a subtle tremor, a faint yielding to my touch. He didn't turn, didn't speak, but his stillness shifted, becoming less guarded, more accepting. The scent of him, whiskey, expensive cologne, and something inherently masculine, filled my senses, a dangerous comfort. "They're fine. The children," I murmured, knowing he wouldn't ask, but knowing he needed to know. "They're sleeping. Sophia drew you a picture. A lion." A soft, almost imperceptible exhalation escaped him. "A lion," he repeated, the word a low murmur in the quiet room. He finally turned, his eyes dark and heavy, finding mine. In their depths, I saw not just the strain of his battles, but a raw vulnerability, a fleeting glimpse into his soul. "She always saw me that way," he confided, his voice raspy, a confession. "Strong, untouchable." He paused, a muscle working in his jaw. "You see differently, Alara." My fingers tightened on his back, my thumb stroking gently. "I see a man fighting for what's his," I corrected softly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "For his family, for a future he wants." My words were not a judgment, but an affirmation, a defiant stand. This was our danger, our future, my choice. A flicker of something, gratitude, surprise, fierce possessiveness, crossed his features. He reached out, cupping my face in his large hand, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. "You have surprised me, Alara Vance," he murmured, his gaze intense, possessive, a silent question in their depths. "More than I ever thought possible." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. His eyes, dark and molten, spoke volumes. He saw me, truly saw me, not just as a tool, not just as a catalyst, but as an essential part of his strength, his future. And in that moment, our love, born of fire and desperation, transformed into something deeper, more resilient, a force capable of reshaping the very foundations of his world. I had made my irreversible choice, and I embraced its peril, its promise, with every fiber of my being. The next few days brought the inevitable confrontation with Alessia. She appeared unannounced, sweeping into the estate in a storm of expensive silk and righteous indignation, her face a mask of furious determination. She had lost her leverage, had seen her carefully constructed power crumble, and she was desperate. I was in the music room with the children when her piercing voice sliced through the air, sharp and demanding. "Dante, I demand an audience!" This outrage cannot stand. I heard Mrs. Thorne's hushed, frantic attempts to deter her, then the ominous click of heels on marble, closer, faster. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it, the final spectacular gambit. Leo and Sophia, sensing the escalating tension, instinctively pressed closer to me, their small hands clutching my dress. Dante emerged from his study, his posture ramrod straight, his face a chilling mask of impenetrable resolve. He stood in the vast foyer, a silent sentinel awaiting her onslaught. Alessia stopped short, her crimson-painted mouth twisting into a snarl when she saw me standing there, a protective barrier between Dante and his children. "So, the little mistress presumes to stand in my home now?" Alessia spat, her eyes blazing with raw fury. "You think you've won? You think you can simply waltz into my life, usurp my position, and not pay the price?" Her gaze, hot and venomous, fixed on me. "You are nothing, girl. A charity case, clinging to a man who will discard you the moment you become inconvenient." My stomach churned, a familiar wave of insecurity threatening to overwhelm me. Her words were designed to pierce, to exploit every old wound, every fear of worthlessness. But then, I felt the small, trembling hands of Leo and Sophia clutching my dress, their eyes wide with fear, and a fierce, unyielding resolve solidified within me. I was not nothing. I was essential. I was needed. "Alessia, that is enough." Dante's voice cut through her tirade, cold and absolute. He took a single, deliberate step forward, his presence radiating an aura of lethal intent. She ignored him, her gaze still fixed on me, a chilling glint in her eyes. "You think you know him?" she sneered, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though it carried clearly through the hushed foyer. "You think his pretty promises mean anything? He is a monster, little girl."
"He will break you!"
"And I," her smile was a grotesque parody of amusement, "I will ensure it." She paused, her voice rising again, a theatrical flourish for the unseen audience. "I have connections, Dante. Information. Things that could ruin you. Things that could expose you. Expose this—" She gestured wildly between Dante and me, "to the world you so carefully conceal. The press, the authorities, they will feast on your recklessness." Dante remained utterly still, his eyes fixed on Alessia, twin pools of absolute command. "You overestimate your leverage, Alessia," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "And you underestimate my resolve." He took another step, closing the distance between them. "Your information is nothing I haven't already anticipated. Your connections, as you so dramatically put it, have already been accounted for." Her face paled, the furious mask momentarily cracking, revealing a flicker of genuine fear. "What do you mean?" she demanded, her voice losing some of its imperious edge. Dante's lips curved into a chillingly cold smile, devoid of mirth, promising only retribution. "I mean your friends in the financial sector have suddenly found themselves under intense scrutiny. Your family's overseas accounts, so painstakingly hidden, are no longer quite so secure. Your political allies are finding their support evaporating like mist in the morning sun." Each pronouncement was a precise surgical strike, disarming her with terrifying efficiency. "Your carefully cultivated image, Alessia, is now as fragile as glass. And any move you make against me, against my family," his gaze flickered to me, then to the children, a potent possessive warning, "will result in your complete and utter ruin. You will have nothing, not your wealth, not your reputation, not even the remnants of your family's influence." Her breath hitched. Her eyes, wide with dawning horror, darted from Dante to me, then back again. The fury was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked understanding. His warning was not a bluff. He had not merely anticipated her gambit. He had dismantled it, piece by agonizing piece, leaving her utterly exposed and powerless. "But the agreement," she stammered, her voice thin, trembling. Dante raised an eyebrow, a cold, dismissive gesture. The terms have changed. You will sign the divorce papers. You will publicly acknowledge the dissolution of our union, citing irreconcilable differences, with no mention of external factors. You will disappear from this city and from my life, quietly. In return, I will ensure that a portion of your family's assets, a small portion, remains liquid, enough for you to live comfortably, anonymously, elsewhere. You will have no contact with my children, no contact with me, and you will never utter a word about my affairs, or a Lara Vance to anyone, ever. Or, his voice dropped, becoming a silken thread of menace. I will ensure your total annihilation, financially, socially, and personally. Do you understand, Alessia? The silence was absolute, punctuated only by Alessia's ragged breathing. She stared at him, her beautiful, cruel face contorted in a silent scream of defeat. Her desperate gambit had failed spectacularly, crashing down around her, leaving her utterly broken. Dante had dealt with her, not with violence, but with a chilling, calculated precision that left no room for resistance, no path for escape. She was removed from the picture, not through death, but through a cunning, devastating deal that stripped her of everything she valued. She would sign. She would disappear. She would cease to exist in his world. My fear of her, once so potent, now evaporated, replaced by a grim understanding of the formidable, terrifying man I loved. The aftermath of Alessia's departure was not a sudden calm, but a gradual settling, like dust slowly descending after a violent storm. The immediate threats subsided, the political maneuvering easing as Dante's decisive actions sent an unmistakable message to anyone who might dare to challenge him. The men of his inner circle, once wary, now looked at me with a new deference, an unspoken acknowledgement of my place by Dante's side. It was a strange, unsettling shift, a confirmation that I was no longer merely the nanny, but an intrinsic part of the complex tapestry of his life. The house, however, finally began to breathe. The oppressive tension that had permeated the air for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. The children, sensing the shift, started to unfurl like delicate blossoms after a long winter. Sophia giggled more freely, her small hand often finding mine, her eyes bright with a nascent joy. Leo, though still reserved, initiated conversations, his questions about the stars and distant galaxies a balm to my soul. We were truly becoming a family, bound not by blood or traditional ties, but by shared experiences, mutual need, and a love that had defied every expectation. Dante, too, began to shed some of his formidable armor. The lines of worry around his eyes softened. His jaw, though still strong, seemed less perpetually clenched. He spent more time with us, joining us for meals, listening to the children's stories, his gaze often finding mine across the table, a silent conversation passing between us that spoke of shared burdens and growing affection. The man who had been a creature of profound isolation was slowly, imperceptibly, leaning into the warmth of connection, learning to trust the love he had so fiercely claimed. One evening, after the children were asleep, Dante found me in the music room, idly tracing patterns on the polished surface of the piano. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp, casting long, intimate shadows. He entered silently, his presence now a welcome comfort rather than an intimidating force. He stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder, a simple, possessive gesture that sent a shiver of warmth through me. "The house is quieter now," I murmured, my voice soft, almost lost in the stillness, lighter. "You did that, Alara," he replied, his voice a low rumble, devoid of his usual detached tone. "You brought light into this darkness. You brought warmth where there was only cold." His hand slid from my shoulder to cup my cheek, his thumb stroking gently. His eyes, dark and deep, held a rare, profound tenderness that made my breath catch. "You are more than just essential to them, to the children. You are essential to me, my partner, my confidant, my heart." My own eyes, moist with emotion, met his. The journey from scholarship girl to the Don's partner had been fraught with peril, with moral battles and terrifying revelations. But standing here, feeling his touch, seeing the raw vulnerability in his gaze, I knew, with absolute certainty, that every risk had been worth it. This dangerous, unconventional life, built on the foundations of his power and our forbidden love, was our life, and I would choose it 1,000 times over. He knelt before me then, his formidable presence humbling itself, a gesture that stole the air from my lungs. From his pocket he produced a small velvet box. My heart hammered, a frantic tattoo against my ribs, anticipating, hoping, daring to believe. He opened the box, revealing not a diamond, but a simple, exquisitely crafted silver key, delicate and intricate, gleaming softly in the lamplight. It wasn't a wedding ring, not yet, but something far more profound, far more symbolic of our unconventional bond. "This," Dante said, his voice husky with emotion, his eyes never leaving mine, "is the key to my study. The key to this house, the key to our home." He took my hand, placing the cool metal into my palm, his fingers closing over mine. "And it is the key to my heart, Alara. A future with you is not just a desire, it is a necessity. A life free from the constraints of a world built on duty and facades. A life where you are not just my partner, but the mother of my children, the queen of my home, the keeper of my soul." His gaze intensified, seeking my affirmation. "Will you build this new life with me, Alara? Our life, our family, our future?" Tears streamed down my face, hot and cleansing, washing away years of self-doubt, of feeling overlooked. This was not a proposal for a conventional marriage, but for a true partnership, a foundational bond in a world that would continue to be dangerous and demanding. It was a promise of a found family, of a place where I was truly seen, truly valued, truly essential. "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, unable to articulate the depth of my joy, my unwavering commitment. "Yes, Dante, 1,000 times yes." I flung my arms around him, pulling him close, burying my face in his neck, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent of him. His arms wrapped around me, crushing me in an embrace that spoke of relief, of possessive triumph, of a love that had defied all odds. The silver key, warm now from my palm, felt like a tangible symbol of our unbreakable bond, our shared journey into an unknown, dangerous, but undeniably beautiful future. We spent hours talking, planning, dreaming in hushed tones, sketching the outlines of our new, unconventional life. We spoke of his children, of their need for a stable, loving home. We spoke of his empire, of the necessary changes he would implement, the new alliances he would forge, ensuring our safety, our future. It would be a life forged in the crucible of his world, but transformed by the raw, authentic love we had found. This was not the fairy tale I had once imagined, but it was our story, fiercely real and utterly profound. The next evening, the grand reception hall, usually a space of cold formality, held a different kind of warmth. The setting sun, a bruised palette of orange and rose, streamed through the tall windows, painting the marble floors in vibrant hues. Dante was there, a formidable, yet softened presence, his arm resting lightly on the back of my chair. Leo and Sophia sat on the velvet settee, no longer rigid, but relaxed, leaning into each other, their faces alight with a quiet anticipation. My fingers, surprisingly steady, hovered over the keys of the magnificent Steinway, no longer intimidating, but welcoming. A hush fell over the room, a gentle silence filled with expectation. I looked at Dante, his dark eyes holding mine, a silent promise, a profound connection. Then I looked at Leo, whose gaze met mine with a tentative smile, and at Sophia, her small face radiant as she clutched her one-eyed rabbit. This was it, our found family. Our hard-won piece I began to play, not a dramatic classical piece, not a melancholic nocturne, but something light, hopeful, a melody born of resilience and joy. It was a piece I had composed myself, a simple soaring tune that wove together threads of lullabies and forgotten folk songs, infused with the quiet strength of new beginnings. The notes danced through the air, filling the once cold estate with a vibrant, living presence. It flowed through the vast spaces, chasing away the lingering shadows of past betrayals, past loneliness. Leo's small foot began to tap a gentle rhythm against the floor. Sophia hummed softly, her head swaying with the music. Dante's hand found mine, resting on the back of the piano bench, his fingers intertwining with mine, a silent, powerful connection. His gaze, fixed on me, was no longer guarded, no longer burdened by the weight of his empire, but open, vulnerable, filled with a love so absolute it took my breath away. He smiled, a genuine, unreserved smile that reached his eyes, a promise of a future where his world, once dark and solitary, was now illuminated by the transformative power of our shared love. The music swelled, a testament to our journey, a melody of hope and unwavering commitment, signifying not an end but the brilliant, terrifying beginning of our happily ever after, knowing that our love would be the guiding force through any future darkness.